We are live from URI, URI Nightly News. I'm Elias Estevez. Today we have a special series on higher education. Started off, we have Alex Vigiano, a woman on education, employment, and income. Alex?
Since 1960, there's been a dramatic increase in the amount of women pursuing higher education. During the 60s and 70s, women became dissatisfied with the idea of having a mere job and transitioned to a more career-oriented mindset. The most rapid effect of the transition towards careers was the sheer increase in the number of bachelor's degrees conferred upon women. In 1960, women earned just 35% of all bachelor's degrees. By 1981, women began to earn over half, and today women earn over 57% of graduate degrees awarded annually. Women also increased their presence in graduate school during this period, surpassing men in the number of master's degrees earned in 1986 and PhDs in 2006. But it's not just a change in the amount of education that women are earning, it's also what they're studying. From the 50s into the 70s, the most popular occupations for women were teaching and social work, and the most popular majors for these women were education, English, and literature. In 1966, only 25% of science and engineering bachelor's degrees were awarded to women. By 2009, women began to earn over 50% of these degrees. An increase in science and engineering degrees being earned by women opened up new doors in professional education. For example, women earning a doctorate of medicine increased from 8% in 1970 to 49% in 2008. On the employment side of this equation, the leap in education does not necessarily correspond to higher female employment. Today, women who earn 49% of medical degrees constitute only 29% of physicians in the workforce. On the other hand, academia has been more forgiving to women with higher education. Women began earning more PhDs than men in 2006 and now constitute over 47% of faculty at public universities. It is important to understand that while these examples are from the US, this trend in women's education is not strictly an American phenomenon. Females have expanded their participation in higher education in all 17 OSED nations, and females now outnumber men pursuing higher education in nearly all wealthy nations. It is known that, at least generally, women do not receive the same compensation as men for similar jobs. Today, an average female with an undergraduate diploma earns roughly 74% of a similarly employed male's compensation. For men with a bachelor's degree, the median yearly salary is just over $47,700. The median yearly salary for a female with a bachelor's degree is just shy of $37,000, a difference of over $10,000 a year, and extrapolated over a 30-year career, a difference of over $320,000. In a full-time management position, men take home an average of $1,328 per week, while women, on the other hand, take home just $951 per week. That's a difference of over $19,000 per year, and over a 30-year career, the average woman would make nearly $600,000 less. Women have increased the amount of education they pursue greatly, and they've also migrated towards scientific and technological degrees. However, it is proving difficult for women to achieve parity with men in traditionally male-dominated fields such as medicine. For URI News, I'm Alex Vigiano. Back to Eli in the news desk.
Thank you, Alex. Now we have Daniel Boju talking about women's rights in the workplace. Daniel?
Thanks, Eli. Today I want to talk about the rise of women in the workforce. This is a growing topic, and I have some data I think would help support that there's a rise. I'm not saying that they've caught up to men yet, but they're on the rise, and the gap is definitely closing. So I got some graphs to show you that hopefully help support my topic. The first graph I have is educational attainment from 1984 to 2009. And in the beginning of the graph, we see it's a very close neck-and-neck race until around 1971 or so. And it breaks away in 2001 where women break away from the men, and now they're above until recent data. This is the unemployment rate of recent college graduates, and they both trend on the same line except for the sharp spike in the male column, but women is significantly lower throughout the data the entire time. So this will show that it's a lot easier for a woman to get a job right now than it is for a man, especially in this economy. The next graph I have is a median earnings of males and females. We see in the beginning of the graph the channel between the two is quite large, and as it gets later and later in the data, it's starting to close, so we see the channel is becoming less and less large. So soon it looks like if we keep going the same path, since the men is more of a horizontal pattern and the women is more of a steep incline, we could see the women catching up with the men eventually. This is women's earnings as a percentage of men's earnings. We see it's from 1960 to 2010, and in the beginning it's extremely low compared to what we see later on and how steep the incline is in the data. Right around 1975, we start seeing a steep upward slope, and this continues throughout the graph, albeit a couple stagnations. This is the same data in a different format. This is by age of women's earnings in comparison to men's. The top two are 16 to 24 years old, and it's a lot more horizontal and higher than the other ones. I assume these are like younger jobs, college jobs, part-time jobs. The lower ones are all on the rise when you get to around career level, and they kind of stay in the same group for a while. The one that's kind of sideways and kind of choppy is around retirement age. So everything else is growing, which is showing possible growth in women's salaries that will soon catch up to men's. So what does the future hold? According to Time magazine and the article I read, women will surpass men in the coming years. Maybe not the direct future, but not too far off. So some questions you might ask is, will this increase the daycare industry, seeing as if you have a working mom, working dad, who's going to take care of the kids? Is this going to increase stay-at-home dads? If women are the breadwinners and they're going to just go to work every day, or dad's going to be more inclined to stay home and take care of the kids? So this could change the structure of the household and change what we know as, or what our parents knew as, a common household greatly. Are women going to take over the world? I don't know that. Higher positions are still male-dominated, so like CEOs are still mainly dominant for males. Females aren't quite there yet, but I wouldn't put it past that number to shrink soon. There are 15 job categories expected to grow in the next decade. All but 2 are dominated by women. There is data to show there will be an increase in women's wages and pay equality in the coming years. So this will knock off the pay inequality problem we've been seeing. And then back to the kids, could this hurt the kids? Is this a negative? I don't think women working would be a negative, but in the aspect of the kids, daycare isn't the most good thing for them. All right, so back to Eli.
Thank you, Dan. Now we have Scott Jeremy talking about the recent costs and increasing benefits of higher education. Scott?
Thanks, Eli. Today I want to talk about the rising costs and decreasing benefits of attending four-year universities and institutions. Recent years have brought about massive increases in the cost of higher education. Both the United States Census Bureau and the College Board show trends suggesting that this increasing price can prove fatal to the industry of higher education. How will you be affected by this ticking time bomb we call our higher ed industry? With the job market dwindling and the price of a degree increasing, every potential college student should be asking the same question: is it worth it for me? There are many variables which need to be accounted for when asking this question. These variables range from tuition charges to opportunity cost. In order to estimate a tuition value, it is helpful to understand how and why these rates are increasing as they are. To examine the driving forces behind the rapid increase of college tuition, we must evaluate the factors affecting the amount of college costs accumulated by tuition charges. Looking at the figure here created by the College Board, we can see the rapid, substantial increase in college tuition since the year 2008. As you can see, there are states such as Arizona with high increases up to almost 80%, and on the other end of the spectrum, there are states like Maryland who only saw a small increase of just over 2%. The national average of these percentages of tuition increases at public institutions is 26.6%. The way to determine if this sharp increase is justified is to compare it to the United States inflation rate. By looking at this figure, it can be seen that the tuition rate climbs at more than double the rate of the inflation. To determine the causes of these jumps, we can look at the growth of tuition as a share of total higher education funding. In this graph provided by the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association, it can be seen that these shares of total funding provided by tuition are not only increasing, but they seem to increase most following economic recession. This decrease in funding is a direct result of the recession and occurs due to the state budget cuts all around. The majority of the tuition hikes are a result of this decreasing ratio between state funding and total institution revenue. As demonstrated in my next figure, we can see that since 2008, only 2 of the 50 states have shown an increase in state funding for higher education. With this deficit in state funding, in order to hold tuition rates constant, federal funding would need to pick up the slack left behind. Unfortunately, totals of all federal funding per student have remained somewhat constant over this period. According to these trends, it's hard to believe that the tuition costs of higher education will ever level out. So back to my previous question, is it worth it for you? Thank you, Eli.
Thank you, Scott. Now we have Daniel Schultz talking about higher education spending raises concerns. Dan?
Thank you. Today, I'll be talking about higher education spending and how it raises concern to today. Are you a fan of higher education spending? And if you are, prepare to be upset because the following data might be a little surprising. College costs have increased by 50% from the years 2000 to 2009. In 2010, America's collective student loan debt has reached over $800 billion, which is greater than its credit card debt. 1/3 of four-year American colleges reported lower graduation rates in 2008 than in 2003. Almost half of all parents of incoming college freshmen make less than $75,000 per year. And also, from 1988 to 2008, undergraduate enrollment in America grew from 11.3 million to 16.4 million. So why have states cut higher education? The cuts have resulted from state and federal responses to the deep recession and continued weak recovery. State tax revenue fell very deeply and remained depressed. States are required to balance their budgets annually, and the recession of 2007 to 2009 hit state revenue hard, and slow recovery continues to affect them persistently. And also, limited revenues must support more students. Higher education dollars are spreading over increasing numbers of students, in part due to the baby boom echo, which causes a surge in the 18 to 24-year-old population. Also, it's important to note, cuts have driven up tuition costs, in which tuition has surged in recent years. Since the 2007 to 2008 school years, after adjusting for inflation, the average tuition at public four-year colleges has increased from more than 50% in 7 states, more than 25% in 18 states, and more than 15% in 40 states. Public colleges and universities have also cut staff and eliminated programs. They have fallen far short off fully replacing funding that public colleges and universities have lost due to state funding cuts. Because tuition increases have not compensated for the loss of state funding, public colleges and universities have simultaneously cut spending to make up for declining state funding. So what should we do about this? States have cut higher education funding deeply since the start of the recession. These cuts were in part the result of a revenue collapse caused by the economic downturn that have recently happened, but they also resulted from the misguided policy choices that state policymakers have made over recent years, which overwhelmingly on spreading cuts to make up for lost revenues. Also, renewing investment in higher education to promote college affordability and quality should be an urgent priority for state policymakers. Strengthening state investment in higher education will require state policymakers to make the right tax and budget choices over the coming years. At the very least, states must avoid shortening tax cuts, which make it much harder for them to invest in higher education, strengthen the skills of their workforce, and compete for the jobs of the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Now we have Mitch and Molina on who are tomorrow's graduates. Mitch.
Good morning, Rhode Island. With economic instability fresh on the mind of many Americans, a lot of people are asking similar questions such as who will be our educated leaders of tomorrow? Who will be our graduates of tomorrow? And by looking at the percentages of males and females that earn a BA within 4, 5, and 6 years, we can start to see a pattern that's developing. Looking at the more recent data on the chart to the right in the 2004 data, we can see that 32.9% of males who enroll full-time will graduate and obtain a BA within 4 years. However, 42.1% of females will earn a BA within 4 years. That's almost a 10% difference. By the time 6 years has come around, 6 years from fully enrolling into a college, about 55.5% of males will have obtained a BA and 60.8% of females will have obtained a BA. That's a difference of 5.3%. That is quite a big number, because we also got to keep in mind that enrollment data is not on a one-to-one ratio. So a 1% increase in females or a 1% increase in males is not a one-for-one. And we can see that by looking at our following charts. If we look, we can see that to the left on the graph, total fall enrollment, females are well surpassing males in enrolling into college. So going back to the table where we just saw that females almost had a 10% spread on obtaining a BA within 4 years, that 10% above males is also accounting for the fact that females are enrolling way more. If we look at public schools, the U.S. average males in public school is 43.62%. Females are 56.38%. The total enrollment average for all public schools is about 14 million. So if we go back and thinking about a 10% the difference in 4 years for obtaining a BA between males and females, that's 10% difference, and females are already at roughly 60% of the school. So that's a lot more females obtaining a BA within 4 and 5 and 6 years. If we look at private institutions, males get about 40.7% of the enrollment, and females get about 60% of the enrollment. In private nonprofit, males are about 43%, and females are about 53%. So in each one of these three different types of institutions, there is a much larger female enrollment than male. So by looking at these charts, we're going to put together the graduation percentage rate that we discussed within 4, 5, and 6 years, as well as the enrollment data that we had discovered. So if we just take a quick look at the public schools with males at about 6 million, so within 6 years, after 6 years of going to public school, about 3,400,000 males will have obtained a BA. I'm sorry, females would have obtained a BA. Females would have obtained in a public school about 4,780,000, and males only 3,378,000. That's 1 million more females than males by the time 6 years is finished in a public institution. For a private nonprofit institution, males will graduate after 6 years. 863,000 males will have obtained a BA. However, females will have 1,280,776 obtained a BA within 6 years in a private nonprofit. The key thing to remember is that looking at all these data within 4, 5, and 6 years, females are largely surpassing males in obtaining a BA and graduating their degree. So they're surpassing in enrollment as well as percentages of earning a degree. So as for who are our graduates of tomorrow, the results are in. Females are leading the way in higher education, and females will continue to be the majority of tomorrow's educated graduates. Thank you, Eli.
Thank you, Mitch. Now we'll change the topic a little bit. Now we'll talk about unemployment and some of the problems causing this. First up, we have Priya Fadul talking about the long-term effects of youth unemployment. Priya?
Thank you. So obviously unemployment is a big issue that's going on in the country right now because of the recession and just a bunch of other things, but now it's starting to affect the youth, and so it's an ongoing issue that we have to pay attention to. And so before I get started, here are some brief facts about unemployment. So the current unemployment rate is 7.6%, which is not too bad. It's showing that we're getting past the recession era and starting to go back to where we were. Since we are talking from Rhode Island, the current Rhode Island unemployment rate is 9.1%, which is a bit higher than the national rate, but it's just showing that it's taking a longer time for Rhode Island to get back to where it was pre-recession era. And so now, so what exactly is a youth? Like, who is considered to be a youth? So it's anyone from the age of 16 to 24. So that's anyone from high school students to college grads looking for a full-time career. And so the current youth unemployment rate is 16%. So as you can see, it's a lot higher than the national rate and the Rhode Island rate. And so in terms of millions, to change it up, 1.04 million students are without jobs, or youths are without jobs. And so since most college students and high school people, they do summer jobs, like summer internships, in the summer of 2011, only 48% had jobs or a summer internship. And so why is this an issue? What is leading to students having youth unemployment? So the first is increased poverty. which means that like kids, they don't have the right resources to go out and find the jobs, or they don't have, like, they're not able to go find the jobs. Another is illegal work. They're finding illegal jobs because they may be easier to find, or you get like more money, you get paid more. The next is crime. So if students have like any type of record or any type of like criminal mark against them, a lot of companies will not hire them because of, obviously, if they're, no matter what it is, they won't be hired. The next is a big one. It's lack of skill. So it's like, do you blame colleges? So people are saying that kids aren't as prepared as they should be when they go out and find jobs. So should we blame colleges? Are colleges not preparing kids enough to go out there in the real world and go find a good job? The next is lack of opportunity. It's kind of like the increased poverty. Kids, they just can't find jobs. Like, they don't have the resources to go out and find jobs or get interviews. And the last one is kind of sad, but it's just they give up. If they go for like months without finding jobs, they'll just give up and not find a job. This is a graph that kind of shows what I was talking about. You can see that in like the recession era, so like 2007, 2008, the number, it increased, it shot up by a lot, and so it's to blame because of the recession. And so like certain long-term effects are, it's hard to find careers. So for most students, the jobs they first get when they get out of college or whatever, it kind of leads them to like grow and like build up in that same company. But if they can't find a job to start with, then they won't be able to find a career. They'll just find like jobs here and there to just keep them, to sustain them. The next side, it'll obviously increase the unemployment rate. If they're not finding jobs or not working, that's going to increase the unemployment rate. And the next is lower wages. Like I said before, if they won't find careers, they'll just find jobs. They'll keep like their family support of just any type of income, so they'll make lower wages. And so finally, the big picture. So how does the United States relate to the rest of the world? So Northern Africa has the highest amount of youth unemployment, which is 27.9%. So that's countries like Egypt, and obviously because of the big revolution, it's struggling a lot. But the lowest youth unemployment rate is East Asia with 9%, so that's China. So basically because China's booming right now. So the United States isn't as bad as Northern Africa, but if this problem doesn't get solved soon, then we could have a major problem on our hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Prayer. Now we have Thomas Preston on Is a Story the Right Move? Now to you, Thomas.
Thank you, Eli. Today I'm going to be talking about austerity measures. What are they and why are they important? So first of all, what are austerity measures? Austerity measures are attempts to significantly curtail government spending in an effort to control public sector debt, particularly when a nation is in jeopardy of defaulting on its bonds. So basically what this means is it's an attempt to reduce debt through decreases in government spending and increases in taxes. What will be affected by austerity measures? Depending on what they are, these are some of the things that could be included in what's affected, but it's not limited to these effects. So before I talk about that, why are they important? They're important right now because as of 2010, the United States government had a gross federal debt of $13,528.8 billion. $4,509.8 of that was coming from the federal government accounts, while $9,018.9 billion of debt is held by the public. This includes the Federal Reserve System and households. In 2010 alone, the United States federal budget ran a deficit of $1,293.5 billion in 2010 dollars. So what will be affected? This could include, but it's not limited to, cuts in government salaries and benefits, layoffs in government workers and employees, reduction in government services, government pension cuts or reforms, decreases in government expenditures, which includes infrastructure construction and repair, and veteran and retirement benefits. It could also include increases in income, corporate, property, sales, and capital gains taxes. Along with that, the Federal Reserve can either increase or decrease the money supply to affect interest rates according to what it wants to do. So what are some things that could result from austerity measures? Economists debate whether or not it'll be effective in increasing economic growth or reducing government debt. So if we look at Europe, when they tried to put in austerity measures into effect, when European countries such as United Kingdom, Greece, and Spain turned to austerity measures, During the global economic downturn of 2008, their budget deficits skyrocketed, making them worse off than before. Unemployment also rose. So austerity measures didn't help in Europe recently. Also, if we look at the Great Depression and when we tried to put in austerity measures in the United States at that time, when the Federal Reserve raised rates prematurely and government was too quick to reduce the budget deficit and tighten fiscal policy, the economy slipped back into another recession that began the second half of the Great Depression. So the bottom line, should the Federal Reserve participate in austerity measures? The Federal Reserve should actually continue deficit financing, which is when the government borrows money to pay for government services and benefits. This will help grow the economy so that austerity can be put forth in the future. It'll increase investment and consumption, and it'll help us avoid another recession. Thank you. Back to you, Eli.
Thank you, Thomas. Now we have Maria Consuegra on clean energy, the power of the sun. Maria?
Thank you, Eli. Okay, so as climate change is becoming a problem and raising concerns worldwide, making the smooth transition to a sustainable, renewable economy is becoming a greater concern. In 2009, Rhode Island Governor Scuteri signed a law that requires the state's largest electricity utility to buy power from renewable energy producers. So what is clean energy? And what's the difference between that and renewable energy? Basically, renewable energy is a natural resource that can be used and replenished and restored. Clean energy, on the other hand, is similar, but can also be fossil fuels. So things like natural gas, which will be considered clean energy and not renewable source. Solar power, on the other hand, can be categorized under both. Clean energy is all about energy efficiency. It's using less energy for the same service, and it's very different from energy conservation, which is mostly on just not using energy and saving energy. Energy efficiency is being efficient with the energy you're using. So another thing is about clean energy is that it reduces negative environmental impact. So things like CO2 emissions and other types of pollution become less prevalent than that of non-renewable sources and fossil fuels. Okay, so what is Rhode Island doing? As I said earlier, the governor's mandate in 2009 requires that 15% of all electricity comes from renewable sources. Last year, the Energy Efficiency Resource Management Council was formed, and they are currently making an energy efficiency procurement plan that will be making a lot of programs developing renewable sources, and one of them to look out for is the offshore wind planning near Block Island. Solar power. So the FERC's March report showed that solar power was all new utility electricity generation capacity that was added to the grid last month. This shows the increase in demand and supply of solar power. And this shows also that all other energy sources combined added no new generation. Analyst prediction, many analyst predictions shows that the largest new source of energy over the next 4 years will be solar power. And we'll be taking a look at this. Since 2008, the amount of solar power powering homes and businesses has grown by 600%. That's from 1,100 megawatts to 7,700 megawatts. This graph that I have composed is my forecasted solar capacity in Rhode Island. So small blue bars are the actual capacity that has been added each year, my forecasted one. The light blue graph is one that's based on growing at the rate it has been growing recently. And the orange one will be the cumulative capacity if it's equal to the previous year and added with the capacity added. So as you can see, it's been growing at an really steady rate. And whether it's growing by the capacity added or the cumulative capacity added, solar power is going to become a prominent, dominant renewable source for Rhode Island. This is a map of solar power in Rhode Island today. We see the 3 stars that are mostly in Block Island, in Providence, and a little upwards. This shows that we still have a lot to improve. We can compare it to Germany, which is a country that doesn't have as much sunlight as we do. We see that there's greater potential for Rhode Island to increase, though we do need more policy work like that of Germany's, which subsidizes renewable energy and let us experience economies of scale, which will make it cheaper to install and have costs be dropping with new technology and increased Chinese manufacturing. We see that solar power will become a greater dominance. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Maria. Now we'll talk a little bit about baseball. We have Trevor Mason on the analysis of the Moneyball theory and evaluation of talent in baseball. Trevor?
Thank you. Back in 2002, the New York Yankees had a payroll of $125 million. And with it, they formed a roster that won 103 games. On the other hand, the Oakland Athletics had a payroll of only $41 million. But with it, they formed a roster that won the same amount of games. And they did it for $84 million cheaper. Oakland's front office had shaped their roster using new advanced statistical analysis, as opposed to traditional methods of scouting. 2 of the most important metrics they examined were on-base percentage and slugging percentage. The first measure of value they used was on-base percentage, which is the rate that a player gets on base. This number takes into account hits, walks, and hit by pitches. Then the total is divided by total plate appearances. The difference between on-base percentage and batting average is usually a good indicator of a player's patience and batting eye. Slugging percentage is very similar to batting average, but instead of every hit just counting as 1, singles are weighted as 1, doubles are weighted as 2, and so on and so forth. To calculate this, total bases are divided by at-bats. The difference between on-base slugging percentage and a player's batting average is usually a good indicator of how much power they have and how many of their hits are extra base hits. A combination of this statistic is on-base plus slugging percentage, and it's a very good all-around barometer of a player's hitting ability, as it measures both aspects, patience and power. As you can see with this line, with this graph, there's a strong positive correlation between OPS and team win percentage. It can be a very useful indicator of a team's overall hitting ability. It's also a better indicator than several other metrics, such as team batting average. The correlation coefficient of team OPS to team winning percentage is strong at 0.597. Conversely, the correlation coefficient of team batting average versus team win percentage is only 0.390. This explains how the 2002 Oakland A's were able to find undervalued personnel and put together a very competitive team on a tight budget. Back to you.
Thank you, Trevor. Now we have Matthew Vieira talking about suicide. I look at the 3rd leading cause of death among young adults. Matthew?
Thanks, Eli. National attention to the problem of college suicide has been growing steadily over the past 25 years. Recent high-profile suicide-related events on college campuses and the ensuing media coverage of these events have heightened a concern for mental health issues that are prevalent among college students. Suicide has psychological origins in people who are coping with anxiety, depression, and other mental illnesses, and social and cultural pressures. Suicide is the third leading cause of death for youth between the ages of 15 and 24, following accidental injuries and homicide, according to the CDC. For young adults in this age category, suicide is the second leading cause of death for college students enrolled at a 4-year institution, following motor vehicle deaths. Vehicular deaths are separated by vehicular death related to alcohol and vehicular deaths not related to alcohol. In this case, suicide tops the #1 leading cause of death among college students, with 6.17 out of 100,000 deaths. Vehicular death not related to alcohol accounts for 3.51 out of 100,000, and vehicular death related to alcohol accounts for 3.37 deaths out of 100,000. Suicide is more common among college students than deaths from alcohol-related car accidents, according to the CDC. Episodes of suicidal thoughts and behaviors vary across many factors, including duration, intensity, frequency, mood states, consideration of methods, distress, and help-seeking behaviors. This table examines the percentages of college students who participated in a National Mental Health Institute survey on their feelings. 45% of college students felt hopeless. 45% of college students felt hopeless, 50% felt overwhelming anxiety, 30% felt so depressed that it was difficult to function, 36% felt overwhelming anger, and 7% had seriously considered suicide. College undergraduates rated specific events as having a large impact on their consideration of suicide, with the top 2 categories: 65% felt emotional or physical pain, and 59% with romantic relationships. Other categories include social problems, school problems, financial problems, alcohol and drug problems, and sexual assault and relation problems. Although college suicides have gained significant media coverage over the last few years, there has been an apparent decline in college suicides over the past 30 years. The decline is closely correlated to the decline of male attendance in colleges, as the suicide completion rate for males are over twice the amount of that of females. Campus prevention efforts and programs, therefore, may not be that effective, as 80% of students who die by suicide never participate in counseling services. Across the country, there has been an increased effort to raise the awareness about mental health services in colleges, as only 26% of students who are aware of their campus are aware of their campus mental health resources. According to a survey conducted by the National Psychological Association in 2009, among students who had seriously considered suicide in the last 12 months, 92% of those had thought of suicide methods or planning. The most common method of suicide contemplators is drug or alcohol overdose. They also divide student risk of suicide by those who came into college already diagnosed with a mental illness and those who developed a mental illness while in college. There is believed to be about 100 to 200 suicide attempts for every 1 completed suicide among persons aged 15 to 24. The Suicide Prevention Resource Center has called suicide and attempted suicide the tip of the iceberg for a large mental health and substance abuse problem among college students. Colleges and universities face increasing pressure to prevent college suicide in the context of the growing numbers of mental disorders among students and the diminishing resources with which to treat those mental conditions. Expanding campus knowledge around this issue of suicide will raise awareness of its prevalence and encourage the facilitation of assistive programs to students. Back to you, Eli.
Thank you, Matt. To close up, we have Devin Marks and Molly Smith on factors affecting states' crime rates. Devin?
Thank you, Eli. Our story tonight involves crime. We have investigated different factors or different variables that affect crime rates in the United States. During our research, we looked at different variables that would affect crime rate, but decided, based on our research, that the 3 that most correlated with violent crime in the United States were the Gini coefficient, poverty rates, and high school education. The first variable, the Gini coefficient, or Gini index, is a measure of inequality. The variable was developed in 1912 by Italian statistician and sociologist Corrado Gini. The Gini coefficient can be used as a measure of income inequality. A Gini coefficient of 0 equates to perfect equality, where a Gini coefficient of 1 equates to perfect inequality. We found in our research that higher values of a Gini coefficient positively correlated with higher levels of violent crime. The second factor that we took into account was poverty levels. For each state, we looked at the number of people living below the poverty line in 2012, the poverty line being about $12,000 per person per year. What we found was that higher poverty positively correlated with higher violent crime, and as you might guess, lower poverty levels positively correlated with lower violent crime. The third variable that we investigated was the percentage of the population in each state that has a high school diploma. We looked at the top 10 states that had the highest percentage of the population earning high school diplomas and the crime rates in those states versus the bottom 10 states and their percentage of the population that earned high school diplomas and the crime rates in their states. What we found is that the top 10 states had a lower crime rate than the bottom 10 states did. Also, overall, not just separating the top 10 and the bottom 10 states, in terms of people with high school diplomas, we found a large positive correlation of achieving a high school diploma with lower levels of violent crime for the United States as a whole. Back to you, Eli.
Thank you, Devin. Now we have Molly Smith. Molly?
Thanks, Eli. As my partner Devin was saying, we ran a number of linear regressions to find the variables that positively correlated with violent crime rate, and we found that those were the Gini coefficient, poverty rate, and education rate in each state. The t-statistic was highest for the Gini coefficient and the education rate in each state. When a variable has a t-statistic of over 2, we can have 95% confidence in these variables. The t-statistic for the Gini coefficient was 3.3, and the t-statistic for education rate was negative 2.0. Additionally, with the linear regressions that we ran, we had an r-squared value of 0.4. R-squared is a measure of how well the variables match up with the line that's predicting. Because our r-squared is at 0.4, we can say with moderate confidence that we see a relationship between these variables and crime rates. On average, the United States spends about $9,644 to educate one student per year. However, it costs more than double that to incarcerate one inmate per year. The U.S. spends an average of $22,600 to keep one person in prison per year. Additionally, the U.S. spends over $50 billion a year on incarceration costs. Compared to the spending for incarceration to education, spending on educating children in each state is incredibly low. When the population of a state is more educated, there is a greater likelihood of lower crime. And with lower crime, there can be lower incarceration costs. When compared to other countries of reasonable size, the U.S. leads in the number of people incarcerated. Since 2002, the U.S. has had the most number of people incarcerated in the world. In other countries, the rate is around 100 prisoners per 100,000 people. And in the United States, the incarceration rate is around 500 prisoners per 100,000 people, with more than 2 million people locked up. With more education, the United States can save much more money on incarceration costs and invest more in the education in the children around the states. Back to you, Eli.
This was URI Nightly News. I'm Lester Estevez. Good night, URI.